Some places operate with no functioning government at all, no police, no local administration, and no one officially in charge. So in this video, I'm going to take a look at 15 real locations where people survive entirely outside the reach of traditional state authority. Starting with number 15, a patch of land that's claimed by no country, Bir Tawil. Bir Tawil is one of the few places of land on Earth with no internationally recognized government, not because of any conflict, but because neither of the two countries bordering it, Egypt and Sudan, wants to claim it. This unusual situation comes from a mismatch between two different colonial-era border definitions. In 1899, the border between Egypt and Sudan was drawn as a straight line along the 22nd parallel. A few years later, in 1902, the British administration created a separate administrative boundary to better match the way local tribes actually lived. That second line placed the Halib Triangle under Egyptian administration and Bir Tawil under Sudanese administration. When both countries gained independence, they each chose the version of the border that gave them the larger and, of course, more valuable area. Egypt recognizes the 1899 boundary, which gives it the Halaib, and leaves Bir Tawil to Sudan. Sudan recognizes the 1902 administrative boundary, which gives it control of the triangle, but makes Bir Tawil fall on the Egyptian side. Well, Bir Tawil itself is about 2,000 square kilometers of dry, sparsely vegetated desert. It's got no permanent population, no towns, no formal infrastructure, and no state presence from either bordering country. Some nomadic pastoralists from nearby regions pass through, but not in a way that establishes any control. There's no checkpoints, no permanent security, and no local administration. And despite the lack of government, Bir Tawil has drawn some curiosity, not because it's got resources or any strategic value, but because the people online have framed it as a terra nullius, or land belonging to no one. Various individuals have traveled there and performed symbolic claims like planting flags or declaring it a micronation. None of these actions have any legal standing under international law. For land to be recognized as a sovereign nation, other states have to acknowledge its existence. And no state recognizes Bir Tawil as belonging to any of these self-declared entities. Although it is technically unclaimed, it's not lawless in the sense of being a hub for any criminal activity. It's simply empty desert with no recognized government authority overseeing it. Egypt and Sudan continue to contest the more valuable Halaib Triangle, but neither wants to jeopardize that dispute by taking responsibility for it. So as a result, the land is just a rare example of a place that operates with effectively no government, not because of ideology or collapse, but because geopolitics has left a legal gap there. Number 14. A community that functions without local government in California, Slab City. Slab City is often called the last free place. It's an informal settlement in the Sonoran Desert of Southern California, where people live without municipal government or even city services. It sits on the remains of Camp Dunlap, a former U.S. Marine Corps base decommissioned after World War II. When the military buildings were demolished, these thick concrete foundations, the slabs, were left behind. In the 1960s and 70s, RV travelers and seasonal workers began parking on the slabs. Over time, the area evolved into this little semi-permanent community. Now, Slab City's not incorporated as a town. It's got no mayor, no council, no police, or even public utilities, and the land itself is owned by the state of California. But the state doesn't maintain infrastructure or enforce local governance there. Residents stay without formal leases, they pay no taxes, and receive no city-provided services like electricity, sewage, water lines, or even garbage collection. People have to rely on generators, solar panels, and hauled water and makeshift sanitation. Now, it maintains a loose social structure here. The population fluctuates significantly, around a few hundred people in the summer when temperatures exceed 45 degrees Celsius, and up to several thousand of the snowbirds in winter. Most residents live in trailers, tents, and converted buses, and the community includes retirees, veterans, artists, people seeking an off-grid lifestyle maybe, and individuals who can't afford any conventional housing. Residents generally respect boundaries around their campsites, and disputes are handled through conversation or social pressure rather than law enforcement. But that doesn't mean the area is without its problems. Fires, theft, and occasional violence do happen. Since there's no local police department, law enforcement comes from the Imperial County Sheriff's Office, which responds only when called. The lack of any formal services means emergencies, medical or otherwise, can be more dangerous than these regulated communities. Economically, the settlement functions through cash, donations, and barter. There are small, unregulated businesses like outdoor cafes, repair services, and informal markets, but nothing licensed or overseen by any state or county regulators. The absence of utilities and property taxes keeps the cost of living extremely low, which is the major reason people move there. But the trade-off is constant improvisation to meet basic needs. Slab City kind of exists in a legal gray area. It's not sovereign, it's not recognized as a town, and it's not governed by residents or even a state. California has periodically discussed selling the land, which could change the status of everyone living there. But until that happens, Slab City continues to operate as one of the few places in the U.S. where a community exists without formal government structures. Number 13. The Kowloon Walled City. And we've talked about this one before. This one's great. The Kowloon Walled City. Once it was located in Hong Kong and was one of the most densely populated places in the world. The site began as a Chinese military fort in the 1800s, but after various treaties and jurisdictional disputes between China and the UK, neither side exercised any meaningful control. By the mid-20th century, the walled city had slipped into a legal gray zone. Hong Kong authorities rarely entered, and mainland China didn't administer it. What followed was kind of a spontaneous, unregulated city. By the 1960s and 70s, tens of thousands of people lived inside there. Estimates often range from 30 to 35,000 people at its peak, although the exact numbers are uncertain because no census was ever conducted there. Buildings rose without permits. Engineers or inspectors, residents constructed new floors directly on top of existing ones, resulting in these interconnected towers packed so tightly that sunlight barely reached the lower levels. Corridors became tunnels, and rooftops functioned as public squares. Kowloon's reputation became notorious because of the triads, these crime groups operating gambling rooms, unlicensed factories, metal workshops, and small food processing plants and other unregulated businesses. However, it's inaccurate to describe the entire community as criminal. Most residents lived normal lives there as workers, retirees, and families who simply needed a low-cost housing. Living conditions were pretty difficult. The lack of sanitation systems meant waste pipes emptied into narrow channels. Water pumps and electrical wiring often failed, and airflow was poor, especially in the lower floors. Still though, residents adapted. Children played on the rooftops, shopkeepers lit corridors with small lamps, and households created tight social networks. Despite its challenges, though, by the late 1980s, safety concerns and redevelopment plans prompted Hong Kong authorities, by then with China's agreement, to clear the settlement. Between 1991 and 94, the entire walled city was demolished and later replaced with Kowloon Walled City Park. Number 12. Marie Byrd Land, Antarctica, Earth's largest unclaimed territory. Marie Byrd Land is a huge region of western Antarctica stretching between the Ross Ice Shelf and the Amundsen Sea. It's one of the most remote areas on the planet, and it's notable for its geopolitical fact: no country has ever formally claimed it. Under the Antarctic Treaty System, all territorial claims in Antarctica are frozen, no pun intended, and no new claims can be made. As a result, Marie Byrd Land remains the largest contiguous piece of land on the planet with no recognized sovereign government. The area is more than 1.6 million square kilometers. It's larger than many countries, but it's got no cities, towns, or even permanent inhabitants. The only human presence comes from scientific stations or field camps established during certain expeditions. They don't administer law there, build infrastructure for residents, or provide anything resembling civil services. When the field teams leave, the region returns to complete isolation. Logistics are still the main challenge today. The landscape is glaciers, ice sheets, and mountain ranges that are buried in snow. Temperatures regularly drop below -40 in winter, and katabatic winds can exceed 150 kph, making year-round presence extremely difficult. Under that treaty, Antarctica is designated for peaceful scientific research. No mining, drilling, military use, or permanent settlement is even allowed. Countries operating research programs have to respect environmental protections, and they're prohibited from asserting any sovereignty over their stations or surrounding areas. They follow their home country's safety rules and logistics, but they don't govern the land that they occupy. There's also no infrastructure beyond temporary runways carved from ice. The closest approximation of government comes from the ATS itself, a multinational agreement that regulates the activity on the continent as a whole, not the territory in isolation. This region is simultaneously protected, unclaimed, and ungoverned. which means no country owns it, no population inhabits it, and no administration operates within it. As long as the Arctic Treaty remains, which it has for more than 60 years, Marie Byrd Land will continue to exist as one of the only large land masses on Earth without a government. Number 11. The Chernobyl Exclusion Zone's self-settlers. The exclusion zone at Chernobyl. It was established after the 1986 nuclear disaster in what is now northern Ukraine. Spans roughly 2,600 square kilometers, and most residents were evacuated within days, and official policy prohibited any long-term habitation. Yet despite the dangers, a small group of people, often called self-settlers, were quietly returning to their villages in the late 1980s and early 90s. And today, a few dozen elderly residents remain, living in mostly abandoned settlements with almost no government presence in their daily lives, which must be nice. These self-settlers return for their personal reasons: attachment to ancestral homes, reluctance to adapt to relocation sites, or a belief that their age made radiation risks less significant. Although Ukrainian authorities tolerate their presence, the government doesn't provide municipal services at all to these functioning settlements. There's no police stations, schools, shops, water systems, or public health. Residents have to rely on wells, gardens, small livestock, and foraged goods like mushrooms or berries, though the latter may carry contamination risks. Electricity exists in some houses because certain power lines were never disconnected, but repairs are usually done informally or not at all. Roads are rarely maintained, and accessing medical care requires long travel outside the zone. Ukrainian authorities do conduct periodic radiation monitoring, environmental research, and rare welfare checks, but they don't manage or supervise daily life within the villages. When a fire breaks out, though, a recurring problem in the zone, settlers often try to contain them themselves until firefighters arrive from outside the restricted area. And while Ukraine governs the land as a whole, the self-settler communities function outside normal structures because they're not officially recognized as residents. Their presence is tolerated, but not formally supported. Life expectancy among the residents is, of course, heavily influenced by age. They were mostly older adults, even when they returned, but many reported preferring autonomy on their own land over dependence in resettlement towns. Interviews conducted over decades show that their sense of home, identity, and familiarity outweighs the hardships of living without government services. These self-settlers illustrate a rare phenomenon, a modern region where people live permanently outside of local governance, not due to ideology or rebellion, but due to a disaster, evacuation policy, and personal determination to remain on their ancestral ground. Number 9. Christiania, Denmark. Freetown, Christiania. It's located in the Christianshavn district of Copenhagen, and it's one of the world's most famous communities operating with minimal government. Established in 1971 when a group of residents occupied abandoned military barracks, Christiania quickly developed its own internal rules, social norms, and management systems. Although it is legally part of Copenhagen, the daily operation has long functioned largely outside the city's framework. Christiania's residents drafted their own community law in the early years, focusing on collective ownership, shared decision-making, and sustainability. Instead of a mayor or council, governance is conducted by consensus-based meetings, which residents discuss issues related to housing, conflict resolution, maintenance, and community projects. There's no property deeds either in the conventional sense. Homes are considered collectively controlled, and individuals have to be approved by others before moving in. For decades, they didn't pay standard rent or property taxes and instead operated under a semi-tolerated arrangement with the Danish government. The community maintained its own infrastructure. Residents handled the waste disposal, building repairs, social events, and, informally, security. And there's no local police presence unless specifically called, and even then, relations between police and residents have historically been pretty tense. Christiania is also known for Pusher Street. It's an informal cannabis market that existed for years despite Denmark's national drug laws, and while authorities periodically intervened, the market often returned. Illustrating the broader pattern, Christiania operated within its own norms rather than any strict enforcement of Danish regulations, and this made it a great example of a community in which state law existed on paper but wasn't applied in practice. In 2011, after lengthy negotiations, Christiania signed an agreement allowing residents to collectively purchase the land through a foundation. This introduced some legal clarity, but it didn't significantly change how daily life functioned. The community continues to manage itself internally using consensus-based systems. They didn't separate from Denmark in a legal sense, but in everyday reality, it has operated for more than 50 years with minimal state governance. Christiania is one of the most studied examples of a long-term functioning community that largely governs itself without the formal involvement of any state. Number 8. Auroville, India. Auroville, founded in 1968 near Puducherry in southern India. It's an international, intentional community built around the idea of living without conventional politics or government. Conceived by Mira Alfassa, known as the Mother, its stated goal is to create a place where humanity can live in peace and progressive harmony, beyond any nationality, region, or political identity. And although it's located within India and subject to national law, Auroville's internal governance has historically operated outside municipal systems. Residents here make decisions through participatory process rather than hierarchical government. Groups like the Residents' Assembly and the Auroville Council take on roles that elsewhere might be held by elected officials, but here, membership is voluntary, rotating, and consensus-oriented. The philosophy is to avoid power structures, meaning decisions can take longer but are made collectively. Rather than any property ownership, land and buildings here belong to the Auroville Foundation, and individuals are considered stewards rather than proprietors, and work contributions replace taxes. Residents are expected to contribute time to community activities, ranging from agriculture to teaching, construction, or administration. And while India manages Auroville's legal foundation through the Auroville Foundation Act of 1988, day-to-day operations and communal planning are all largely handled internally. Tensions do occasionally arise between Auroville and Indian authorities, particularly over land development and environmental planning. When disputes happen, state agencies have ultimate authority, but the spirit of Auroville is to manage everyday life without intervention. It's not lawless here. Rather, it's a unique example of a community that tries to operate without political parties and elections. For more than 50 years, it makes it one of the world's most significant sustained experiments in non-governmental communal living. Moving on to number 7, Pitcairn Island, a remote community that did function with virtually no government. Pitcairn Island, it's located in the South Pacific. It's best known as the remote home of the Bounty mutineers and their Tahitian companions who settled there in 1790. For decades after their arrival, Pitcairn existed without external government or legal institutions. Its isolation, thousands of kilometers from the nearest cities, made it effectively beyond the reach of any state for much of the 18th and 19th centuries. When the mutineers arrived, they established a small, self-sustaining community. With no government officials, legal documents, or external authority, the group relied on informal rules and shared necessity. The mutineers and their descendants created their own system of land division, labor sharing, and dispute handling, and for many years, literacy was limited. There were no written laws, and conflict resolution depended heavily on personal relationships and mediation. Its population remained tiny, between a few dozen to around 200 at its peak, so governance was practical rather than structural, and because Pitcairn was effectively unknown to navigation for many years, visiting ships were rare here. The first formal outside contact after settlement came in 1808, when the American ship Topaz unexpectedly discovered the island's surviving population, led by John Adams, the last living mutineer. And then the island's community gradually adopted more structured rules as literacy improved and missionary influence arrived in the mid-19th century, but these developments were still internally driven rather than enforced by any external authority. But British involvement remained limited until the late 1800s, when Pitcairn was formally incorporated into a colonial administrative framework, and even then, day-to-day life remained largely autonomous due to distance and communication. Modern Pitcairn, though, operates under British administration, and it has defined governance structures now, but its early settlement periods is an historic example of functioning society without a government. Pitcairn's early decades show how a tiny remote population can develop its own social order and survive without external political structure. Number 6. Palmerston Island in the Cook Islands. Palmerston Island is one of the most isolated places in the Pacific. It's about 3,200 kilometers from New Zealand. It's reachable only by infrequent supply ships or private vessels. It's part of the Cook Islands, but it operates on a day-to-day basis with almost no direct government presence. What makes it unusual, though, is that nearly the entire population, typically between 25 to 40 people, descend from a single man, William Marsters, who settled the atoll in the 1860s with 3 Polynesian wives. Their descendants manage nearly all local affairs through family-based decision-making, not any formal governance. There is no police force, no permanent government, no traditional municipal administration. A single island advisor does visit periodically but doesn't oversee daily life. Residents run their own affairs through informal councils. Infrastructure is likewise community managed. Electricity comes from solar panels and generators, water is collected from rain catchments, and food is sourced through fishing, coconut harvesting, and occasional supply drops. The handful of buildings, though, here include the school, church, and small community hall, are all maintained through shared labor. Education is provided by 1 or 2 teachers, often they're on contract, but the community itself oversees how lessons fit the island's needs. Medical services are extremely limited. A small clinic is there, but complex emergencies would require evacuation. Culturally, Palmerston has its own dialect of English, and social life here revolves around a close-knit network of relatives who share meals, responsibilities, and traditions, and decisions like who can move to or remain on the island are based on family lineage rather than any immigration law. The Cook Islands do provide legal frameworks, passports, and external diplomacy, and New Zealand offers broader support, but in practice, Palmerston functions with near total autonomy, rooted in kinship instead of governance. Number 5. Tokelau. Tokelau is a remote New Zealand territory made up of 3 small atolls. It offers an unusual governance structure. Each village functions with a high degree of autonomy using traditional systems rather than a central government. The heart of the village governance is Taupulega, a council of elders composed of heads of extended families, and these councils manage nearly all local matters, including land distribution, public works, and fisheries. Public works, fisheries management, social disputes, and community welfare. There's no political parties, and elections, where they do exist, are typically for limited roles. Tokelau has no cities, no national capital on its own soil, and no standing police separate from village enforcement. Each atoll enforces its rules through community-approved wardens or traditional authority, which relies on negotiation. Any serious legal cases are referred to New Zealand, as Tokelau lacks its own full judicial system. Schools, clinics, transportation, and resource management are all handled locally, and when supply ships arrive, usually every few weeks, villages jointly decide the distribution priority. Its small population, about 1,500 people across the 3 atolls, and geographic isolation make the administration really unnecessary. Village rules, like limits on fishing zones or cultural conduct, are enforced by collective pressure. And while they technically have a national structure and it participates in international agreements through New Zealand, its internal functioning is one of the closest modern analogs to a society operating without a conventional government. Most decisions affecting daily life are made within walking distance of every home. This example shows how a small population that's rooted in strong cultural traditions can operate with minimal formal governance. The strength of kinship networks and customary systems allow the villages to function effectively, even in these remote conditions. Number 4. The Republic of Užupis, Lithuania. Užupis is a tough name to say for me, but a small neighborhood in Vilnius in Lithuania. It's known for declaring itself an independent republic on April 1, 1997. Although Užupis remains legally part of the city and the Lithuanian state, in practical, cultural, and social terms, it's operated with a strong self-governing identity that functions independently of traditional government. It's not an independent country, but it behaves as a semi-autonomous community with its own constitution, symbolic president, cabinet, currency, flag, and traditions. This area was once an industrial district with an aging housing stock, and after the fall of the Soviet Union, it became a haven for artists, musicians, and free thinkers. It has its own sort of border that's marked by a sign on a bridge, along with a symbolic passport stamp that visitors can receive from local businesses. Residents embrace the idea of creating a playful but serious alternative model of community life. The community's constitution, displayed publicly in multiple languages on a wall, outlines some humorous yet philosophical rights, like everyone has the right to make mistakes, everyone has the right to be happy, and a dog has the right to be a dog. Though not legally binding, the Constitution does serve as a guide and a form of self-regulation that the residents reference when they discuss community issues. There's no municipal government inside this area separate from Vilnius, yet residents handle many local matters informally through neighborhood assemblies. And city police rarely intervene because the area is peaceful and the community tends to manage its own disputes internally. Užupis also maintains its own public events, including an annual Independence Day on April 1st, and during those celebrations, volunteers symbolically close the bridge. They check passports and distribute local currency. None of this has any legal force, but the tradition reinforces a sense of identity and autonomy. Although Užupis does not meet any formal criteria for being a self-governing region, the long-term function as a community that handles its own affairs, culturally, socially, and symbolically, places it in a category of locations that operate with minimal government. It's a distinct form of autonomy based not on legal independence, but on sustained collective identity. Number 3. Mount Athos, Greece. Mount Athos is located in northern Greece. It's a fully recognized autonomous monastic state within the Hellenic Republic. And while not entirely without government, Greece retains sovereignty, of course. Mount Athos operates under a self-governing system that predates modern nation-states. The region is home to over 20 Eastern Orthodox monasteries and roughly 2,000 monks. Its status was formalized in the Byzantine era and later affirmed under Ottoman rule and then modern Greece. Under the Greek constitution, Mount Athos is allowed to govern its internal affairs, religious, administrative, and judicial, all according to centuries-old monastic rules. The Holy Community, comprises of representatives from each of the 20 monasteries, is the central governing body. It oversees matters ranging from land management to internal disputes to heritage conservation. Each monastery, in turn, is self-administered by an abbot and a council of monks. Greek government officials do not intervene in these processes. There's no municipal governments, no mayors, no police force in the conventional sense, and no civilian courts. Disputes among monks are resolved through monastic law and councils. Civilian crimes involving outsiders are referred to Greek authorities, but internal matters rarely require any state involvement. Infrastructure like roads, piers, water systems, guest houses, and agricultural areas are all maintained by the monks or monastery workers. There's no commercial development either. Economic activity centers around agriculture, craftsmanship, religious tourism, and of course donations. While Greece handles the external defense and formal diplomacy on behalf of the peninsula, Mount Athos functions independently for nearly all aspects of daily life. These traditions have continued uninterrupted for more than 1,000 years, making it one of the world's most enduring examples of a functioning society operating largely outside modern government structures. Number 2. The Principality of Sealand. The Principality of Sealand is one of the most unusual territories in the modern world. It was a former World War II fort located in the North Sea that's operated for more than half a century without a conventional government or elected officials. Sealand sits on Ruff's Tower, an offshore platform built by the British military in 1942 to defend shipping lanes from German aircraft. After the war, the structure was abandoned and fell outside regular administration of the United Kingdom because it stood beyond the 3 nautical mile territorial limit. In 1967, Paddy Roy Bates, a former British Army major and pirate radio broadcaster, occupied Ruff's Tower and announced it as the independent Principality of Sealand. Bates, who had planned to use the platform for offshore broadcasting, developed the declaration into a symbolic micronation. The Bates family then created a constitution, minted its own coins, issued passports, printed stamps, and referred to themselves as the ruling family. The UK government never recognized Sealand as a sovereign state nor as any other country. A 1968 British court ruling determined that the platform lay outside British jurisdiction at the time, which Sealand supporters later interpreted as evidence of de facto independence. However, international law does not recognize sovereignty claims over man-made structures, and Ruff's Tower has no territorial sea or landmass that could qualify it as a state. Today, the entire structure measures only a few hundred square meters and supports a tiny, intermittent population, usually 1 or 2 caretakers. Daily operations consist of maintaining the structure, managing visitors, overseeing small-scale commercial ventures like selling titles, memorabilia, or hosting data servers in past years, and ensuring safety on a platform that's constantly exposed to harsh weather and corrosion. One of its most notable events happened in 1978 when a group of German and Dutch individuals attempted to seize the platform while the founding family was away. Michael Bates, Roy's son, retook the fort in a brief confrontation and detained the invaders. One of the captured men claimed sea-land citizenship, and then the family treated the dispute as a matter of internal law. Now, eventually, a German diplomat visited to secure his release, an action that sea-land enthusiasts later described as diplomatic recognition, though Germany didn't treat it like that. Sealand's presence in the North Sea became more complicated when the UK extended its territorial waters to 12 nautical miles in the 1980s, placing the platform firmly within British jurisdiction. Legally, the UK has authority over Sealand today, but has generally ignored it, unless safety or environmental concerns arise. It's not sovereign in any legal sense, yet it remains one of the longest-lasting examples of a place that operates with its own internal administration, separate from the government. Number 1. International waters. The single largest place on Earth that operates without a government isn't a hidden settlement or a remote island. It's the open ocean itself. It's known as the high seas. This region includes all parts of the ocean that lie beyond any country's 12 nautical mile territorial sea and outside the 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone. These waters are not owned by any nation, and no government has sovereign authority over them. Despite covering roughly 45% of the Earth's surface, the high seas have no police force, no elected officials, and no centralized administration. Under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, the high seas are treated as a global commons. Countries retain jurisdiction only over the vessels that fly their flag, but they cannot claim the waters or impose territorial control. This means that day-to-day life on the high seas, fishing, shipping, scientific research, and transit happens in a zone where no single government governs the space itself. There are rules, but they exist as international agreements rather than enforceable laws. Because no one governs the waters directly, the high seas operate as kind of a self-regulated frontier. If a dispute arises between people aboard different vessels, the only legal framework available comes from international maritime law, but there's no physical authority present to enforce those laws. In practice, enforcement depends heavily on cooperation between the states, and there are many areas where oversight is weak. Illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing is one of the clearest examples of what happens in ungoverned spaces. Fishing fleets can operate far from shore for months, taking advantage of limited patrols and slow-moving international process. Some vessels engage in destructive practices, overfishing migratory species that no single nation can protect, and without territorial control, monitoring the ecological impact becomes difficult. Crime on the high seas can also emerge in these ungoverned waters. Instances of forced labor aboard fishing vessels, unsafe working conditions, human trafficking, and illicit cargo transfers happen because there's no localized authority to intervene. Some ships switch flags. They're known as flags of convenience to countries with lenient oversight, making it even harder to hold operators accountable. When ships engage in piracy, smuggling, or illegal wildlife transport, only multinational naval efforts can respond, and coverage gaps remain enormous. Around 90% of world trade moves across international waterways. Major shipping routes cross thousands of kilometers without entering any national jurisdiction. Scientific expeditions, too, rely on the freedom to navigate these waters to study climate systems, ocean currents, and deep-sea systems. These research efforts do help inform about international policy, but they don't constitute governance. They are voluntary and conducted without any authority. Recent efforts, though, like the 2023 High Seas Treaty, do aim to create stronger conservation frameworks, but even these depend on countries enforcing the rules on their own fleets, rather than a centralized ocean government. The ocean remains fundamentally ungoverned territory. It's regulated only through voluntary cooperation and the limited power of international law. It's both a vital shared resource and a reminder that immense parts of our planet still exist beyond the reach of human authority.